My name is Clara Vance. I'm 32 years old, and for the last 7 years, my family has referred to me as the one who works with spreadsheets. Last Thursday night, at my grandmother's funeral reception, my uncle stood up, raised a glass of expensive champagne, and announced that he was taking over the family logistics firm. My mother wept with relief. My cousins smirked. They all looked at me, waiting for me to cry because they thought I had been left with nothing but $100 vintage watch. What none of them knew, what they couldn't possibly comprehend, was that the man in the charcoal suit sitting quietly at the bar wasn't a guest. He was a federal forensic investigator, and the small silver key inside my pocket didn't belong to a watch. It belonged to a private vault in Zurich that had been completely emptied at exactly 9:15 that morning. Welcome back to Silent Storm Stories, where family secrets come to light, and the quietest people are the ones who change the locks. If you've ever been the reliable one who was expected to sit down and shut up while others took the credit, drop a comment below and hit subscribe. Because tonight, the math finally balances out. To understand the storm that broke out at that reception, you have to understand the architecture of the Vance family. My grandfather started Vance Logistics with 2 trucks and a warehouse in Toledo, Ohio. By the time my dad and my uncle Marcus took it over, it was a $40 million empire. But wealth in our family wasn't measured in dollars. It was measured in noise. My uncle Marcus was loud. He wore bespoke suits, drove sports cars on the company expense account, and spoke at city council meetings. My sister, Chloe, was a high-end interior designer who couldn't balance a checkbook, but knew exactly which local magazines to appear in. And then there was me. I graduated top of my class in corporate finance from Ohio State. I don't like cameras, and I don't like shouting. So, when my grandfather's health began to fail 3 years ago, Marcus made a decision. He put me in the back corner office, the one near the server room where the air conditioning always hums too loud, and handed me the books. "Just keep the columns straight, Clara," he told me, not looking up from his iPad. "Leave the big decisions to the people who understand the market." I wore that back office anonymity like a winter coat. It kept me warm, and it kept me safe. For 3 years, I reviewed every invoice, every fuel receipt, and every offshore corporate tax filing. Other people look at a balance sheet and see columns. I see heartbeats. I can tell you exactly when a company is growing, and I can tell you exactly when someone is stealing. And by the winter of last year, the numbers were screaming. It started small. A $12,000 consultant fee paid to a shell corporation registered in Delaware. Then a $25,000 travel expense for a conference in Miami that my uncle Marcus never actually attended. In my family, if you ask about money, you are treated like a disease. My mother has a specific phrase for it. "Don't poison the well, Clara." It means, don't let the truth ruin the aesthetic of our luxury. So I didn't ask. I did what any good corporate forensic accountant does. I opened a separate encrypted hard drive on my personal laptop, named it Project Raincoat, and began downloading every single bank routing number that passed through our system. 6 months ago, my grandfather pulled me into his bedroom. He looked frail, surrounded by oxygen tanks, but his eyes were clear. He was a man who built things with his hands, and he knew his son Marcus was a destroyer. He handed me a small leather-bound notebook and a vintage silver Tiffany watch. "Clara," he whispered, his voice dry like old paper. "They think I'm blind because I'm dying. They think Marcus is the future. But a house built on sand doesn't need a manager. It needs an anchor. Keep the watch. Don't lose the key inside the casing." He passed away 4 days later. The funeral was a grand production. Marcus hired a professional choir. Chloe color-coordinated the family's black attire so it would look perfect for the local newspaper photographers. I stayed in the second row, wearing my old charcoal coat, feeling the cold weight of the silver watch against my wrist. The reading of the will took place in the main boardroom of Vance Logistics. Marcus sat at the head of the table, already holding a gold pen. Chloe was checking her reflection in the polished mahogany wood. The family lawyer, a man named Sterling who had been on Marcus's payroll for a decade, cleared his throat and began to read. It went exactly as Marcus had planned. The real estate went to my mother. The 70% controlling shares of the corporation went directly to Marcus. Chloe received a lump sum trust of $200,000 for her artistic endeavors. And then came my name. To my granddaughter, Clara Vance, I leave my personal effects, including his vintage timepiece, and the sum of $10,000 to pursue her hobbies. Marcus didn't even try to hide his laugh. He leaned across the table and patted my arm. You can buy a lot of graph paper with $10,000, kiddo. Don't worry, your job in the back office is safe. We still need someone to log the mileage. Chloe offered a tight, sympathetic smile, the kind you give to a stray dog you have no intention of feeding. I looked down at the silver watch. I didn't say a word. I stood up, tucked my chair in perfectly, and walked out of the room. What they didn't know was that the evening before, I had finally opened the secret compartment inside the back of that vintage watch. There was no key to a safe deposit box inside. There was something much better. A small piece of microfilm containing the private banking credentials to an unlisted corporate account in Switzerland. An account Marcus had been using to hide over $4 million in skimmed company revenue to avoid federal taxes. Marcus thought he had inherited a gold mine. He didn't realize he had inherited a liability. By signing the controlling shares over to himself, he legally assumed 100% of the company's past debts and financial fraud. My grandfather knew this. He had structured the will specifically to let Marcus walk right into the trap. At 9 a.m. on the day of the reception, I sat in my car outside the federal building in downtown Columbus. I had a coffee in one hand and the encrypted drive with 3 years of Marcus's signatures in the other. I didn't call Marcus. I didn't text the family group chat. I simply uploaded the files to the Internal Revenue Service's criminal investigation portal. Because when you're an auditor, you don't scream at the thief. You just hand the ledger to the judge. Now, let's go back to the reception. Marcus was standing near the ice sculpture, bragging to our biggest logistics client about his expansion plans. My mother was telling anyone who would listen how Marcus was the savior of the Vance legacy. Then, the heavy double doors of the ballroom opened. 2 men in dark suits walked in. They didn't look at the ice sculpture. They didn't look at the champagne. They walked straight past my mother, straight past Chloe, and stopped right in front of Marcus. The ballroom went completely silent. The only sound was the classical music playing from the speakers. Marcus Vance? The taller man asked. His voice was level, completely devoid of emotion. Yes, Marcus said, his smile freezing. We're in the middle of a private family event. We have a federal warrant for your arrest on charges of corporate tax evasion, grand larceny, and wire fraud. Please step away from the table. My mother shrieked. Chloe dropped her glass, and it shattered against the marble floor. Marcus looked around the room, his face turning the color of old chalk. He looked at the lawyer, but Sterling was already backing away toward the exit. And then Marcus looked at me. I was standing near the coat rack, holding my glass of water. I didn't smile. I didn't frown. I just raised my wrist, checked the silver watch my grandfather gave me, and took a slow sip. They wanted a show. I gave them a settlement. It has been 3 months since that night. Vance Logistics went into federal receivership. Marcus is currently serving a 4-year sentence at a minimum security facility in Pennsylvania, and his assets have been completely frozen to pay back taxes. My mother and Chloe had to sell the suburban mansion to cover the legal fees Marcus left behind. Last week, the federal court-appointed trustee called me. Because the company needed to be liquidated, they looked at the records to see who actually knew how to run the operation without collapsing the supply chain. They offered me the position of Chief Restructuring Officer. My office is no longer in the back by the server room. It's on the top floor, with windows that look out over the entire city. My sister texted me yesterday for the first time in 90 days. No photos of dresses, no emoji hearts, just a single sentence. Can you lend me $3,000 for the rent? Family takes care of family. I stared at the screen for a long time. Then I closed the message, opened my main spreadsheet, and labeled the text under unrecoverable debt. I didn't reply. Some accounts are simply closed forever. Thank you for listening to tonight's story on Silent Storm Stories. If you stayed until the very end, drop the word anchor in the comments so I know who the real listeners are. Sleep well, and remember, never underestimate the person holding the pen. I spent the next 4 months living on coffee, wood dust, and the high scaffolds of Fairmont Hall. While my sister Brooke was picking out flower arrangements and arguing over the seating chart for her wedding, I was 70 feet in the air, scraping away 80 years of nicotine stains and cheap oil paint from the ballroom ceiling. My mother's warning from the kitchen hung in the air like humidity. Don't be underfoot, Ingrid. Don't ruin the impression. Every time Grant's family, the wealthy Whitfields, walked through the hall in their tailored wool suits to check on the venue, my mother would suddenly find a reason to guide them away from my ladders. She would loudly talk over the sound of my scrapers, steering them toward the gardens. To them, I was just a contractor they hired through a company name. A girl in heavy boots and denim with wood glue under her fingernails, but working on a ceiling that old means you touch every inch of the house's history. You see the gaps where the original wood shrunk. You find the places where the builders cut corners in 1897. And on a Tuesday in late October, just 3 weeks before the wedding, my chisel hit something that didn't sound like plaster. I was working on the heavy molding right above what was going to be the main bridal head table. There was a hollow cavity behind the decorative oak leaves. When I reached my hand into the dark, my fingers brushed against a heavy tin box. It was sealed with electrical tape, thick with dust. I didn't open it on the scaffold. I waited until 9 p.m., after the grand hall went dark and the site security guard went to get his dinner. I sat under a single work light on the ballroom floor, peeled back the tape, and opened the tin. Inside were 3 things: a set of original blueprint variations for Fairmont Hall, a leather ledger belonging to Grant's grandfather from the late 80s, and 4 uncashed corporate checks made out to a company called Newell Construction, my father's old corporate name before he retired. I opened the ledger. The dates matched the exact year Abe Fletcher had restored this ballroom the first time, back in 1987. My father had always told me he retired early because of his back. He had raised us in that small house in Ohio, telling us that we were poor because the world was tough on honest carpenters. But as I read the numbers in that old ledger, the ink told a completely different story. My father hadn't retired because of his back. He had been paid a massive, silent settlement by the Whitfield family to walk away from Fairmont Hall after his apprentice, Abe Fletcher, discovered a massive structural defect in the foundation. A defect the Whitfields had hidden from the city to keep the property value from dropping.